Hey everyone, it's Alyssa, and today I'm going to show you how I made this cactus / succulent inspired sunset desert cake. There's a lot of words in that title, but I just really like the pink and green kind of sunset type of vibes. So for this video, I decided not to speed up any of the clips so that we can really do it step by step. And also, sometimes I feel like when you speed up the clips, sometimes it's a little bit hectic, and I wanted to have a bit more of a relaxed video. Of course, you can skip ahead to any part in this video that you'd like. I'm just going to start from the beginning where I have cut the layers of my vanilla cake to be nice and even on the top, and then I made a vanilla buttercream, an American buttercream, and I just made a ring around it so that I could add some sour cherry jam that I had made earlier. For this cake, I am putting buttercream in the middle of the layers, but I'm keeping it very thin because we're going to have a lot of buttercream on the sides and on the top of the cake, and I just kind of like for things to be evened out. I don't really like too much frosting. I like frosting, but I just don't like so much frosting that when you serve it, it's just not a good proportion. So that's what I'm going to do here, and because the jam was still a bit thin, it also kind of helps with the moisture of the cake. And for some reason, this cake was starting to get very crumbly even though it was actually pretty moist, and I think that's just because I had kind of cut the cake when it was still a little bit too hot, and sometimes I find that it just kind of creates some crumbs. I'm just finishing up the crumb coat here, and then I'm going to put the cake in the freezer for about 5 minutes just so that that first coat of frosting will set. Then I moved on to use AmeriColor food gel, and I started with the peach color, and we're going to mix this in order to make the sunset part of our cake. And I always say just do 1 drop because you never really know how the color will look, but for this one I wanted to add a little bit more color, so I went in with another drop of that peach. I don't have a clip of it, but I also made a even darker shade with the more pink, the dusty rose color, so that we could have 2 different tones. Then I moved on to our cactus, so I'm using laurel and cypress for these colors, and I just kind of did the same thing. I made 2 different tones so that way we can have some variety in our decorating. I went ahead and prepared all the piping bags that we need, and I am using some couplers as well. So for the tips, I will put links down below in the description box because some of these tips are generic. This is an open star tip, and then I have a petal tip, and I also have a number 3 tip, and then a tiny open star tip, and then I have a really big open star tip. And I'm gonna list all of the tip numbers in the description below, and because some of them are generic, I'm going to actually put links to the Wilton and Ateco ones that are much better in my opinion. Now I took the cake out of the freezer, and I'm going to start by just really gently adding on our buttercream, because sometimes I like to add buttercream on a cake when it's frozen, and it almost feels like you're kind of painting on the cake with your palette knife. Just because it's frozen, it allows us to have a bit more control over the decorating part. I have these cake boards that I got off Amazon, and they were just a random generic cake board, and as you can see, they're really greasy, and I don't like that. So I recommend using the Wilton cake boards. For this, luckily, we're going to be using some graham cracker crumbs, so we don't have to worry about that oil showing, but if I was to be giving this to a customer, then I would definitely change the cake board out because it just looks really bad. But I don't like to waste, and this is only for my family, not a customer, so I just kept it on this cake board. Now to do the ombre effect for the sunset, I'm going to be adding on our darker dusty rose color buttercream, and I'm just kind of casually spreading it on because we're going to use our, actually this is a chopping block for bread, but I use it as a way to smooth out our cakes. So I'm just gonna go over the cake about 4 or 5 times, and I'm actually not really looking for perfection in this cake. I just kind of want it to be as smooth as I can, and if there are any holes, I do fill in the holes, but otherwise I am going for a bit more of a rustic look for this cake. And I just love smoothing out the top of the cake. It just is really pleasing when you kind of smooth all those edges down. Something about it is just really fun to do. So I used a food processor to crush up some graham crackers, and I'm just going to put them all along our cake board so that we can add to the whole desert kind of vibe. Next, I'm going to add some graham cracker crumbs to the top of the cake, but I'm only going to focus on spreading them out on one side because I want our succulents to just kind of take this sort of C shape on the top. So I'm just carefully deciding how to spread them out. So I put this cake to the side, and now we're going to work on making the succulents, and this part was so much fun. So I'm using a flower nail here. You can find them on Amazon or any kind of bake supply shop, and I cut up some parchment. I always try to save my parchment paper for when I make flowers. So a good tip is put some buttercream on the flower nail and then put your parchment square on it so that it will stick better. I didn't look up any pictures of succulents for this, I just kind of did it all by memory, and so because of that, I'm not really going after one type of specific succulent. I just kind of like to have fun with it. I think that that's really important when you're baking and you're trying new designs, is to really have fun with it, and that's easier said than done. And for me to say that is something, because I am definitely a perfectionist, and I know how much it hurts when it doesn't really look exactly like how you envision, but I'm really working on that in order to just kind of relax and enjoy the process better. This succulent is definitely my favorite because I like how it's just really thick with like 2 C's, and the way that it just kind of plops out onto the parchment paper. And I don't know, it's so cute. And then I'm going to actually switch my tip, and this is really easy when you have a coupler because all you have to do is just unscrew the tips and you don't have to worry about having those extra piping bags. I did want to add some flowers because I think that the succulent flowers are so pretty. When you just see a flower blooming in the desert or a flower that's on a cactus, I just feel like it looks extra delicate. So I wanted to make some delicate petals, and I'm using a 104 tip, and I'm really kind of pushing the icing flat against the parchment paper in order for those petals to be really thin. For the next design, I wanted to do a rose, but I don't know if you've ever seen succulents before, how their leaves or petals, or I'm not sure what they're called, but they're just thicker, like they're chunkier. I don't know how to describe it, so I wanted to kind of mimic that by using a petal tip again, but I'm using the larger opening and I'm having that pointed up. And then I just turn the tip over so we have the thinner opening pointing up, and this is going to make a rose that is more thin and more delicate. And then I had to make another one of these thick succulents. Some of this buttercream was starting to get really warm because it was humid in the kitchen, and when that happens, your buttercream can start to get a bit melty. but I feel like it kind of worked for my advantage because when it comes to flowers, and in this case succulents, I don't really like when things look perfect. And I know it's kind of funny to say because I told you guys that I'm a perfectionist, but in that perfectionist, when you make flowers and other types of real life objects, I think when they look imperfect, they actually look more like the real object itself, if that makes sense. Like in this one, you can definitely see that trying to make these little cactuses, whoa, they're definitely drooping over right there, but they're still somewhat holding their shape. So that's why I wasn't too worried. So what I did is when I finished each succulent, I put it on a baking tray. You keep it on the parchment square and you move it to a baking tray. And then we're gonna put these in the freezer for about 10 minutes. So that way we can work with them really easily and we can kind of place them and move them around in order to get the best looking placement on the cake. This is the last little succulent that I'm going to show you guys, and this one was really an experiment. So again, I'm using the two-tone icing, but I switched to a leaf tip for this one, and I kind of wanted to just make this sort of leafy succulent just because I wanted some different textures. So the whole idea that I had behind this cake is that the succulents would have different textures and just create some interesting variety for the eye. Now we're going to move on back to the cake, and I'm just going to add some cactus. And for this I used an open star tip, and I'm just going to pipe it directly onto the cake, and I'm going to make some little cactus arms and just some other little cacti, I think is the plural term. And for this I didn't really have a plan, I just kind of went for it. And I know I kept going back and forth between, should this just be a cactus cake or should this just be a succulent cake, because I believe there's a difference between the two of them. And I kept going back and forth between, is it going to be overboard to have both the cactus and the succulents? And although I really do like simple and minimalistic things most of the time, there's sometimes where I think that it can work together to have a little bit over the top. And so that's kind of the plan that I went into for this cake, just because I really thought that we're just gonna go all out for the desert theme, so we might as well add both cactus and succulents to one cake. I took all of our little succulents out of the freezer, and here you can see they're really cute on their own little individual parchment squares. I'm going to just kind of start to place them on the cake. The best part about working with frozen buttercream is that if you don't like where you place something, it's really easy to just pick it up and move it. And so that's kind of the whole concept here, is that I'm just trying to create the best looking succulent scene that I can, and because it's frozen, it's just super easy. You save so much time, and when the buttercream does start to come to room temperature, sometimes it can sweat, so just a heads up, but most of the time it really is okay. And for this cake, it didn't even really sweat at all. To tie everything together, I just added a couple little dollops of some more green buttercream just to cover up any of the holes, and because I piped it onto the graham cracker crumbs, it was having a hard time sticking. I just really like how this whole cake turned out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.